The Solomon Sea in the early months of 1943 did not glitter. It glowered. The horizon boiled in heat, the sun hammered steel decks, and every sailor or airman who looked toward Bougainville saw not water and sky, but an invisible corridor where death commuted by timetable. Americans had a phrase for it by then, Tokyo Express. They said it with the same tone a farmer uses for a storm that breaks his crops year after year, inevitable, pitiless, and strangely personal. Convoys to Guadalcanal and the creeping forward bases toward New Georgia steamed, as though each nautical mile had to be purchased twice, once in fuel, once in blood. Low-slung destroyers, hulls streaked with rust and salt, threaded black nights lit only by the cruel white flash of naval gunfire. The war in the Solomons was not a grand fleet duel. It was a knife fight in jungle humidity, fought in darkness, fought at the limits of endurance, fought in the knowledge that the enemy had chosen this arena, knew every current and island shadow. Rabaul fortress, hive and dagger fed it all. From its runways on New Britain Island, Japanese twin-engine bombers launched like clockwork. Betty bombers in neat V formations, glass noses gleaming in tropical sun, escorted by Zeros that seemed to hang in the sky on nothing but willpower and myth. They struck shipping lanes, airstrips, and the narrow spines of ridgelines where Marines clung to scraped-out foxholes and swore the jungle itself conspired against them. The price was measured in wrecked transports off Lunga Point, in smoking anti-aircraft guns manned to the last shell, in pilots who never returned from dawn patrol. Planners in Nouméa and Pearl Harbor stared at wall maps that showed more than geography. They showed momentum. And momentum, like morale, is a currency. The Japanese still spent it freely. Worse, the enemy's nerve center in the theater was not some distant headquarters sealed away behind marble and maps. It was a man who insisted on touching the war with his own hands. He was the architect of Pearl Harbor, student of Harvard and the U.S. Naval War College, a gambler by temperament and cold statistician by habit. He had once lived in America, had admired Detroit's assembly lines, had watched cars roll from factories like bullets from a belt. He knew, clearer than most Japanese leaders, the industrial hydra they had provoked. And yet he had bet bravely, desperately, that shock, speed, and audacity could beat steel tonnage and oil reserves. In early 1943, he still believed the bet could hold. And so he flew. Inspection tours, morale visits, forward command reviews. He appeared at airfields carved from jungle mud, shook hands with Zero pilots barely out of adolescence, spoke words of iron and empire to soldiers who were starving but unbowed. He radiated certainty. To kill an admiral like that in the front line was unthinkable. Until a whisper came across Admiral Chester, Nimitz's desk, a whisper dressed in code groups, intercepted over the Pacific ether, pulled apart by mathematic ghosts in windowless rooms in Hawaii. It said, in essence, it might as well have said, "Destiny will occupy this flight path." The intercept moved through channels like a live wire. It reached a man who, though no pilot, understood air war better than anyone in the Pacific. Captain Edwin T. Layton, U.S. Navy, Fleet Intelligence Officer, calm voice, sharp mind, never one to boast. He had stood in the radio room on the morning of December 7th and watched the Pacific erupt into flame. He had, twice now, sat in the quiet after slaughter and wished he had been louder, faster, more certain. At Midway, he had proved the value of insight sharpened by courage, predicting the Japanese strike with the precision of a surgeon. Now he held a secret so explosive it could rewrite the map or burn the code-breaking miracle that had given it. He looked at the intercept. He read it twice, then again. His pencil tapped the paper, not with doubt, but with calculation. His enemy was not a fleet today. His enemy was time, secrecy, and the fragility of luck. Kill Yamamoto, and the Tokyo Express might waver, break his chain of command, and Rabaul's rhythm might falter. Remove him, and maybe, just maybe, the Japanese naval air offensive poised to smash the fragile Allied foothold in the central Solomons would stumble. But say nothing, and the express would continue. Convoys would keep threading night seas against Zeros and torpedo bombers. New Georgia would bleed. Ships would die by the dozen. Layton did not see assassination. He saw strategy by subtraction. Yet others saw only risk. Exposing the code-breaking? Catastrophic. Failure? Humiliating. And the idea itself almost absurd. Fly army fighters, P-38s, of all things from Guadalcanal, across water as far as a bomber run, skimming the surface to avoid radar, to intercept a specific bomber at a precise minute? A wild experiment. A mission built not on radar or radio, but on mathematics and nerve. Joint, silent, impossible. Nimitz listened. Layton laid out the implications, the odds, the stakes. The silence after he finished was long enough to taste. Then came a simple nod, the kind men give when they understand that history is offering only one door. If the Tokyo Express ran on schedule, then so would the Americans. But their timetable would be written in trigonometry and will. In muddy tent offices on Guadalcanal, at improvised map boards pocked with thumbtack scars, another phrase began to circulate, whispered first, then spoken aloud. For every sailor who had watched a transport take a torpedo, for every marine who had counted ammunition by single digits, for every ground crewman who had wiped blood and oil from a pierced fuselage, that sounded less like arrogance and more like arithmetic. The battle for ships was a battle for time. And in the Pacific, time was bought not in weeks, but in seconds, the time it took for a bomb to fall, a torpedo to strike, a pilot to squeeze a trigger. Captain Layton had done the unthinkable. He had asked fighters to kill an admiral. The Solomon's night fell heavy, jungle steaming, sea sighing beneath a sky of hostile stars. Somewhere in that darkness, a formation of Japanese bombers traced the black air on the strength of their leader's certainty. Somewhere else, in tents where maps lay under red lamps, Americans sharpened pencils and made preparations that looked like insanity and felt like hope. The problem no one could solve, the hemorrhage of ships, the tyranny of range, the iron timetable of Rabaul suddenly had an answer. It was audacious, it was improbable, it would be tried. The humid air at Henderson Field clung like damp wool. Aircraft revved, stuttered, and coughed to life along the pierced steel plank runway scars. Mechanics worked shirtless, streaked in oil and red dust, faces gaunt from malaria and sleepless rotation. The war here was not clean. It was sweat and fever and the constant percussion of distant guns. This was where Captain Thomas G. Lanphier Jr. and Captain Rex T. Barber lived. Not in comfort, not behind polished desks, but in the half-feral existence of fighter pilots in the South Pacific American Eagles, in a world of mud and sickness. Lanphier, explosive in personality, lived for combat like a man burning at both ends. Barber, quieter, kept his emotions like his shooting steady, deliberate, deadly. They belonged to the 339th Fighter Squadron, part of the 13th Fighter Command. Their aircraft, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, twin-boom predator of the Pacific, fast as rumor and twice as lethal at altitude. They were young. Youth was demanded here. The jungle consumed hesitation like fire takes dry grass. Word filtered down slowly, always couched in secrecy. Something big. Something reckless. Something that sounded like fiction, even for Guadalcanal. A courier arrived at the squadron tent with a sealed envelope. Inside, typed orders stamped in authority black, no target named, no destination specified. Just mathematics, headings, fuel loads, and a whisper heavier than ordnance. This mission matters more than your lives. The briefing room at Henderson was little more than a tent, with maps tacked to boards, corners weighted by rocks to keep them from curling in the damp. There, with the smell of mildew and kerosene in the air, a Navy officer no one recognized laid out a plan that belonged to pure audacity. A projection of Rabaul sat like a dark star at the top of the map. To the southeast, the ragged line of the Solomons, trailing like bones across a table. The Navy officer pointed to an airstrip on Bougainville. No name explained, no biography needed. Every man in the tent knew. the architect of Pearl Harbor, the man who had vowed to dictate peace terms in the White House, who believed America would tire and fall, intercept, neutralize, not kill. Intelligence men used such language like surgeons describing amputation. Lanphier leaned forward, eyes bright. "You want us to shoot down his bomber?" The officer did not blink. "You will shoot him down." Silence, not disbelief calculation. Barber's jaw tightened. He thought of the convoys hugging the spray-whipped seas, of the transports that had burned, of friends buried on thin coral soil, a single bomber, and the war could shift. Yet doubt entered the tent like a draft. Lieutenant Besby Holmes finally voiced what many thought. "That's over 400 miles over water? No radio? No navaids? At treetop height?" The Navy man's reply came as flat as the ocean at dawn. "Yes. And if we miss him?" "You will not miss him." This was not arrogance, it was obligation. Codebreakers in windowless rooms had placed their souls on the line to pass that itinerary forward. If the mission failed, those rooms and the secrets in them might burn. They could not miss. Lanphier grinned like a man staring down impossible odds and calling them by name. Barber didn't grin. He only nodded once, because some missions are not chosen, they choose you. The mechanics got the new orders next, strip weight. Every unnecessary ounce came out, guns cleaned to surgical perfection. Fuel tanks topped until they bulged like lungs full to bursting. Pilots calculated mixture settings, cruise speeds, times to climb, glide margins if an engine died. Over 400 miles out. 400 miles back. No room for error, no one to come fetch them. Lieutenant Louis Lou Kittel remembered the moment his crew chief whispered, voice raw from coral dust air, "Sir, this sounds like a one-way ticket." Barber's reply was quiet. "If it is, then we cash it for the right reason." Even the chaplain sensed the tension and offered a simple line, "Fly clean, boys. The Lord favors those who finish the course." But finishing the course required more than faith. It required math. Cold, beautiful, unforgiving math. Unknown Japanese flight path? No, Layton's team pinned it to the minute. Enemy speed? Known. Distance? Calculated. Required launch time? Down to the second. Night draped itself over Henderson Field like wet cloth. Pilots tried to sleep and failed. Jungle insects droned like engines. Somewhere in the dark, a Marine hummed a hymn out of tune. Somewhere else, a mechanic kissed the bullet-scarred skin of a lightning's wing and whispered, "Bring him back." Lanphier lay awake, staring at canvas overhead, adrenaline simmering like a volcano under tarp. Barber sat with a photograph in his hand, wife, stateside, smiling in a sun hat. He slid it carefully back into his pocket. He would fly for her. Yes, but he would also fly for another truth. At first light, the pilots gathered beside their gleaming P-38s. The air tasted of salt and aviation fuel. Captain Doug Canning, assigned to the mission as a lead navigator, whispered to no one in particular, "Gentlemen, we are about to remove a chess piece kings usually never touch." Lanphier's reply came sharp. "Electric, we're flipping the whole board." Their commanding officer stepped forward, eyes hard, voice low. "You will not speak once you launch. No radio, no chatter. The world will not hear you, only history." Engines fired, twin roars shaking palm fronds. The lightning's props blurred, a metallic heartbeat. One by one, they taxied toward the runway, long shadows stretching across steel matting. No fanfare, no cheers. Only the grinding courage of men climbing into metal that might never bring them home. As the first wheels lifted, the ground crew watched in reverent silence. These were not just planes. They were scalpel strokes aimed at the heart of an empire. The fighters disappeared into the low morning haze, flying not toward battle lines, but toward an idea that precision, audacity, and belief could break a tide the Japanese thought eternal. Behind them, the Solomons breathed. Somewhere beyond the sea, Yamamoto prepared to board his bomber, confident the heavens still favored him. He did not know the storm already had wings. The runway fell away beneath them like a trapdoor. Henderson Field shrank into streaks of brown and green, framed by jungle palms that swayed in the downdraft of departing lightning wings. The Pacific opened ahead, a flat, endless expanse that even veterans still found humbling. There were no landmarks, no island chain to steer by. Only water, horizon, and the fragile arithmetic that had to hold, radio silence, not restrictive, absolute, headsets filled with nothing but engine growl and the wind clawing at canopies. Every man in those cockpits had trained for dogfights, for the snap turn, the deflection shot, the shouted warning from a wingman when tracer lines stitched toward a tailplane. But this mission felt like flying into the void. No chatter, no jokes, no "watch your six," just the sound of twin Allison engines beating like war drums. Lanphier led the formation out over open sea, throttles pushed forward, prop discs shimmering silver in morning sun. Barber kept tight position on his wing, eyes steady, hands loose on the yoke. Farther back, Lieutenant Besby Holmes and Lieutenant Ray Hine followed in the second element insurance, or backup, depending on perspective. The distance stretched beneath them until their very existence seemed suspended between sky and fathoms. They flew low, skimming waves so closely that sea spray occasionally flecked plexiglass. The plan demanded it. Radar couldn't see you when the ocean swallowed you. One wrong bank, and you could bury a wingtip into salt water and vanish without a trace. But they stayed low because the mission required obedience to the numbers more than instinct. Fuel. They carried it like hope in tanks slung, beneath wings thin-skinned, ugly, disposable, extra miles encased in aluminum. But weight stole speed, altitude bled range, and mistakes became arithmetic sins measured in gallons. They held formation as if the sky might betray them, if they loosened even an inch. A school of flying fish erupted from the surface below, startled by the roar overhead. Otherwise, the ocean remained indifferent. It had swallowed fleets before. It could swallow fighters without hesitation. At roughly 100 miles out, the sun lifted itself over the horizon, turning the water to molten gold. Barber's eyes flicked to the sky every few seconds. The Japanese patrolled too. A zero could appear as a speck one moment and as death the next, but the horizon stayed clean. Lanphier glanced at his clock again. Time mattered more than enemy patrols. They needed to arrive at a point in the sky at the exact minute Yamamoto's bomber would cross it. They were hunting a shadow across thousands of square miles, trusting only codebreakers and chronometers. No radar vectors, no escort, no rescue if they ditched, no second attempt. To keep alertness sharp, some pilots whispered checklists under breath. Some prayed. Barber simply breathed slow, as if he could exhale fear. His gloved hand brushed the photograph again inside his flight suit. 1 hour. 2 hours. The coastline of Guadalcanal receded into memory. Overwater navigation in wartime, every pilot learned the fear of it. Land disappeared. Time became the only compass. Course deviations were measured in degrees, but errors paid in lives. The Pacific had claimed more aircraft through miscalculation than enemy guns ever would. At the 90-minute mark, Lieutenant Doug Canning, flying point as Pathfinder, glanced sideways to catch Lanphier's attention. He raised one hand to tap the face of his wristwatch. Their world existed now in seconds. Barber's inner voice repeated it like a mantra. Trust the math, trust the mission. They had, launched earlier than logic, suggested another layer of deception. If Japanese spotters saw them airborne, they'd assume routine patrol schedule, not a timed intercept. But now the constraint tightened. They could not arrive early and loiter. That would blow fuel margins. They could not arrive late, because Yamamoto would already be gone. History sometimes hinges on artillery barrages and tank divisions. This one balanced on the minute hand of a pilot's watch, beating rhythm against his wrist. The ocean beneath them remained deceptively calm. Only the rising heat shimmer hinted at the violence that had passed through these waters. Sunken cruisers, drowned men, torpedoes gliding like sharks. The Solomons remembered, even if the surface pretended otherwise. Lanphier checked fuel again. Calculations held, but lean mixture settings were unforgiving. One lapse, one unnecessary throttle jerk, and they'd run dry within gliding distance of nothing. Naval search planes might find them, days later, if at all. Barber had seen pilots hauled in after drifting on bamboo rafts, skin burned raw, salt-scoring lips and eyelids. He had seen bodies, too, washed ashore by tides that did not care for rank or valor. This mission required a peculiar courage, not the hot fury of combat, but cold obedience to a plan that had no contingency. A faint cloud bank appeared ahead, the first true cover in hours. Canning dipped his wing and led them toward it. The lightning formation slid beneath the thin haze, ghosting into concealment. Then they climbed. Not sharply, but in a shallow, coordinated rise, like predators rising from ground level to pounce. They had been invisible to radar at sea level. Now they emerged just enough to see without being seen. The engines hummed at reduced power, cages of discipline holding back adrenaline. At altitude, the air thinned and the sky deepened into dangerous blue. Barber's breath hissed through his oxygen regulator. Sweat dried on his brow, replaced by the cold realization. They were nearing the point of no return. Lanphier raised one hand. A silent command. They spread formation slightly, lightning wings level, guns armed. Fuel low, but enough. Watches synchronized. The vector line ahead felt almost visible, drawn across the morning sky. Somewhere beyond that horizon, a Japanese admiral climbed into a bomber, crisp uniform immaculate, unaware that invisible math and American resolve waited for him, a heartbeat of stillness. A breath before the storm, Barber thought of a phrase he had heard once from a Navy chaplain. Fate is a track you can only ride one direction. Ahead, the sky brightened. Vapors drifted. Silence roared louder than engines. Then, like spectres rising from the haze specks, distant specks, twin engines, escort silhouettes, Lanphier's pulse kicked, Barber's jaw set like steel. They were not hunting shadows anymore. They had found Yamamoto, and nothing stood between them now but the last seconds of two nations' will. For a heartbeat, the Pacific sky seemed to hold its breath. Their tiny, silver-glinting shapes cutting clean through morning light. Not dots anymore, not possibility. Contact. Two Betty bombers in line, their green paint flashing like dragonfly scales, escorted by 6 Zero fighters spaced in a cautious stagger. Cruising, not hunting, confident. Their vulnerability lay not in their machines, but in certainty. They did not expect American fighters here. Not this far. Not at this hour. Not in this silence. Lanphier's hand clenched his throttle. Barber saw it too, two twin-engine Bettys, long wings fragile with fuel tanks, controlled by pilots used to striking, not shielding. And somewhere inside the lead bomber, seatbelt clipped with ceremonial precision, sat Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the man who had promised to run wild in the Pacific for 6 months after Pearl Harbor. The man whose 6 months had ended almost to the day. Fate, it seemed, kept precise calendars. Lanphier dipped his wing. No radio. Just the sharp, silent language of formation attack. He climbed, trading fuel for altitude, pulling high and left to dive. Barber stayed low, a hawk skimming treetops, flanking wide for head-on intercept, his preferred kill geometry. Above and behind, Holmes and Hines slid back like shadows, preparing to pounce if anything went wrong. Every move had been rehearsed only in imagination. No chalkboard session could replicate what they now faced. This was not theory. This was steel, air, and the heartbeat-stopping realization that the entire Pacific War might pivot in the next 30 seconds. The Japanese formation did not react yet. Their flight path steady, their speed consistent. Yamamoto's pilot held textbook cruising altitude. The Zeros remained in their loose escort pattern, engines droning an oblivious lullaby. Barber's oxygen hissed softly in his ears. He knew the truth. Every lightning pilot whispered after dark. The Betty burned if you breathed on it wrong. A flying fuel tank, wrapped in thin aluminum, fast in a dive, lethal with torpedoes. But not today. Today they were prey. Barber's gloved hand tightened on the yoke. He could see the tail gunner, now tiny shape, scanning lazily. The gunner didn't expect death to come from the horizon like a silent blade. Lanphier rolled inverted. Gravity pulled. The lightning knifed downward with terrifying precision, twin booms slicing morning air. That was his style, attack like thunder, like inevitability. Barber instead traced a rising arc, preparing to meet the bombers from the front patient, exact, surgical. Two doctrines, two temperaments, one mission. The Japanese spotted them a beat too late. A wing dipped a startled motion, a flash of alarm. Then a shout crackled in Japanese cockpits, unheard by American ears but etched forever in recollection. Too late, Lanphier fired first. 8 .50 caliber machine guns spat fire, spent brass, clattering against his canopy, tracers carving white-hot geometry into sky. Bullets tore through the first zero in his path, the fighter peeling apart like paper in a storm of metal. Flames blossomed. The sky filled with shrapnel and disbelief. Barber didn't look. He held his course. The lead Betty loomed large, Yamamoto's aircraft gliding unaware into the crosshairs of math, fate, and American resolve. He squeezed the trigger. The lightning shuddered as guns thundered, nose vibrating, tracers streaking in perfect convergence. The Betty's nose erupted in flashes, glass shattering outward, engine cowling bursting like fruit struck by artillery. Smoke trailed instantly, flames licked the wing. Inside, time slowed. Witnesses later said they saw the bomber sag, its right wing dip, engines coughing black. Barber saw a shadow through flame at the cockpit window, a cap, a white glove, a last moment unshielded by rank or destiny. Then gravity claimed the bomber. It rolled, nose down, wing shearing trees before exploding into jungle fury. Branches burst into flame. Leaves turned to ash in torrents of smoke. The blast bloomed orange and black, a funeral pyre born in green canopy shadow. The second Betty banked violently. Panic, instinct too late for strategy. Barber rolled left, but Holmes slashed in from above, tracers ripping another wing. That bomber, too, belched fire, tail breaking free, the fuselage tumbling into forest. 2 plumes, 2 deaths, shock waves of decisions made months earlier rippling outward in burning wreckage. The Zero escorts reacted now too late to save anything but honor. They dove in fury, guns flashing, sun glinting off turning propellers. But the Lightnings did what they were built to do. They ran like lightning. Dive, power, split S, vanish low where the oceans swallowed their radar signature again. Barber banked hard. Lanphier's voice would have barked triumph, but silence held. Orders forbade radio. They disappeared southward, wavetop height, engines screaming, hearts hammering, fuel needles sinking toward red. Behind them, the jungle still burned. No dogfight, no drawn-out duel. A precise strike. A single thread pulled from the tapestry of Japanese command. And somewhere, deep in the burning trees of Bougainville, the Navy's most daring intelligence gamble lay fulfilled. Yamamoto, chess master, strategist, believer in decisive battle, had died not on the bridge of a battleship, not amid roaring shells, but in the sky, felled by timing and cold arithmetic. 30 minutes after takeoff, he had shaken hands with pilots. 30 seconds after first gunfire, his war was over. But the Americans were not safe. The ocean still stretched endless before them. Fuel gauges now read like death sentences. 1 misleaned carburetor setting, 1 engine cough, 1 zero-spotted doom. Lanphier risked 1 glance at his clock. They had made history. Now they had to make it home. The sky behind them still trembled from fire and history, though they could no longer see Bougainville. There were no contrails, no echoes, only the memory of burning jungle and the fading glimmer of tracer arcs that had rewritten a war. Now there was only ocean and fuel gauges sinking like verdicts. Lanphier levelled off at wavetop height, throttles eased to lean mixture, props set low RPM, every gesture careful as a surgeon's. Barber checked his fuel again. Then again. The needle hovered near a point that every pilot dreaded. The math said, enough. The gut whispered, liar. No victory cheers, no backslaps. No words at all. The order still held, radio silence. Every man in those P-38s had rehearsed the ambush in imagination. None had rehearsed the silence afterward, the lonely, crushing quiet where triumph could not yet breathe because death was still in the air. They did not yet know whether they would return heroes or ghosts. Salt spray kissed their canopies as they flew almost absurdly, low, sometimes no higher than a tall palm tree. Low flight saved fuel, low flight hid them, and low flight meant one moment's lapse of concentration could turn a wingtip into a scythe and the sea into a gravestone. Lanphier's lightning rocked steady ahead. Barber watched the glint off his twin tail fins, an angular halo cutting the horizon. Somewhere behind, Holmes and Hine were specks of discipline, following the same invisible seam of air. They had killed Yamamoto, and now the Pacific wanted its toll. A lone albatross wheeled overhead, wings wide and effortless, as though mocking the drumming labour of warplanes. Barber envied the bird for a heartbeat. Then he shook it off. Sentiment wasted oxygen. They crossed a thin line in the sky, imaginary, but every flyer felt it, the point where Japanese interceptors were unlikely. The escort Zeros had pursued only briefly and half-heartedly, shocked, disoriented, unable to process what had happened. No reinforcements had come. The Japanese command had not yet understood the magnitude of the blow, but fuel understood nothing but arithmetic. Barber adjusted his mixture again. Every drop mattered. He could almost see the tanks as hourglasses. His heart beat hard enough, he feared it might drain him too. In the cockpit of the lead element, Doug Canning, the pathfinder, did something only a navigator wired to pressure and responsibility would think to do. He smiled. A thin, tired smile, but real. How many missions offered this feeling? To know, without words, that time itself had bowed, that a pencil line on a map had intersected destiny to the second? He'd never admit it, but in that moment, Canning felt like he was steering not just a flight, but fate. Barber saw nothing of that smile. He was too busy scanning the horizon, one eye on the shimmering water, one on the sky behind. His left hand never left the throttle. His right fingers kept brushing his fuel gauge like a talisman. A pilot's superstition, as long as you watch the needle, it cannot drop too fast. The coastline of Choiseul and Vella la Vella appeared faint in the shimmering haze like ghosts of land. Not safety yet, just proof the world had shape again. Guadalcanal still lay far beyond. Then Barber's stomach tightened. One P-38 lagged. Not by much, but enough. Lieutenant Ray Hine. His plane sagged slightly in formation, an agonizing inch lower, a hair slower. Hine had taken the wide trailing arc during the attack. Those extra turns, those extra throttle bursts, they were fuel debts coming due. Holmes slid closer to him, instinctive, protective. But Holmes could not share fuel, could not tow him, could not call him on radio, only watch and hope. Barber breathed slow. There was no room for fear. Fear wasted clarity, and clarity was fuel too, a glint on the horizon, not friendly shoreline, not salvation, smoke, one thin column rising where jungle met sea. Henderson? Too soon, too far. Instead, it was memories, mirror, another fire, another battlefield. Guadalcanal's wounds still smouldered in places. War did not heal evenly. The formation pressed on. Another 5 minutes, another 10. Engines hummed like iron bees. Barber could feel the vibration in his bones. The sun climbed, shadows shortened on the water, then faint, like a dream coastline. Guadalcanal. It rose from haze like a salvation that dared not appear too quickly. Hills smudged the horizon, palms like teeth, rolling ridges where Marines once dug graves in red clay. Home if they could just touch wheels to ground before the tanks ran dry. Lanphier's formation tightened. They did not break radio silence. They did not cheer. They only continued to fly with the precision of men who knew that gloating invited gravity's revenge. Fuel lights flickered. Carburetors coughed once. The airframes shuddered in collective sympathy. Still, they held course. At last, runway. Henderson Field, ragged and determined, a strip carved by sweat and bullets. Control tower barely more than wood and wires. Ground crews frozen mid-stride as silver shapes skimmed in low. Lanphier landed first. Touchdown was not graceful, it was a controlled collapse of terror into triumph. Barber followed, wheels shrieking against steel matting, dust exploding around him. Holmes landed hard, Canning flared late. One after another, the lightnings returned to earth like men leaping from a burning roof onto solid ground. Then one empty stretch. No sign of Hine. Engines shut down. Propellers spun down into silence. And in that silence, Barber finally exhaled something like a prayer and a curse tangled together. They had done it. But not all of them. Ground crews rushed. Someone cried. Someone laughed hysterically. A mechanic lifted his cap and pressed it to his chest. The intelligence officer in the jeep did not smile. He only nodded once as if checking a final box in fate's ledger. Still no Hine. Lanphier climbed out first, swagger, tempered by exhaustion. Barber slid from his cockpit more slowly, legs trembling as much from depletion as from adrenaline. He looked east, toward the open sea where Ray Hine had disappeared into sky and fuel vapor. Mission success was absolute, yet victory had jagged edges. A jeep skidded to a stop. An intelligence aide stepped out, voice barely controlled. "Gentlemen, the message is confirmed." He didn't say Yamamoto's name. He didn't have to. The news rippled across the field, not shouted, not cheered, just absorbed, like sunlight after long storm. Lanphier finally broke the silence. "History's not going to believe this one." Barber didn't answer. He looked once more toward the sea, then whispered, "They won't have to believe it. We were there." The wind carried the words across the runway, over the jungle, out toward the endless water where one P-38 had not returned, and where a fleet admiral's ambition lay shattered among burning trees. Mission was not yet spoken aloud, but already it lived in the air. They had slain a giant. Now came the reckoning. They found the wreckage first by smell. Sweet, sickly aviation fuel, heavy oil, and scorched earth fusing into a scent that lingered long after the fires died. Local scouts saw the smoke column before the patrol arrived. The jungle canopy smoldered like a funeral pyre. Leaves curled black. Great trees bled sap and steam. Japanese infantry pushed through undergrowth, boots sinking into ash-softened soil. They found the first bodies tangled in vines, crewmen thrown clear by force rather than mercy, uniforms scorched, rank insignia twisted in heat. The Betty's wing lay 30 yards from the fuselage, shredded like rice paper cut by flame. Then they reached the cockpit. It was mostly intact, nose crumpled into the earth at an angle that spoke of final acceleration rather than glide. The armor-framed glass lay shattered outward. They saw the pilot still strapped in, face blackened, hands frozen around controls. And behind him, slumped sideways in his seat, cap still faintly white beneath soot, his sword belt charred, his gloves burned to stiff parchment. But his features were recognizable, calm, composed, almost as though asleep. A staff officer knelt in the mud. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled as he reached to confirm what every man already felt in the air. "Gensui Yamamoto, Shiko. Field Marshal Yamamoto is dead." No one spoke for a long time. Even the jungle seemed to withdraw its hum, cicadas falling quiet as if nature itself bowed its head. The officer reached, gently straightening the admiral's cap. Then he issued the order, "Guard his body, guard his honor. No word leaves this place." But words outrun orders in war. While engineers cut through wreckage and stretcher-bearers prepared bamboo litters, a runner sped back through jungle paths. Another sprinted to the forward radio post carved into hillside. Before a coded message lifted into sky toward Rabaul, grief was already in motion. The code was terse. Emotion had no place in format. Commander-in-Chief Combined Fleet aircraft crashed. Admiral confirmed killed in action. At Rabaul, the cipher officer who received it froze. His eyes did not widen. He did not gasp. He simply read the message again, lips forming each word like a prayer he desperately wished to mispronounce. Then he carried it to the operations room. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's loyal chief of staff was reviewing sortie schedules. He looked up, impatient, then saw the paper trembling slightly in the officer's hand. Isoroku took it. Read it once. Twice. Then again, as though each repetition might dissolve the letters, the dispatch clattered from his fingers. Everyone in the room stayed motionless. Officers do not collapse, flags do not bend. But Isoroku swayed, one hand gripping the map table like a man bracing against a storm that only he could feel. He whispered, almost inaudible, "Sensei, teacher." For Yamamoto had been that to him mentor, strategist, architect of Japan's early thunder in the Pacific, the only man in uniform the nation's political elite feared to overrule, the one commander whose brilliance could mask the empire's industrial fragility, whose gambler's nerve had given Japan 6 months of triumph, and now silenced in a burning grove. Isoroku straightened slowly. His eyes, red but unbroken, turned to the stunned staff around him. There will be no announcement. Not yet. A pause, heavy as steel. We will bring him home. Orders rippled through the base. Fighter squadrons scrambled too late for vengeance, but necessary for ritual. Warships prepared to steam. A black-draped launch was readied on Bougainville's nearest usable beach. By dusk, Yamamoto's body lay wrapped in white cloth aboard a small transport, guarded as if the emperor himself had fallen. A sword rested across the shroud. Officers stood at attention. Under gathering evening cloud, there was no wailing, only bowed heads, glinting bayonets, and the low murmur of sutras whispered by chaplains with trembling hands. The launch eased into lagoon waters. Engines hummed, a naval ensign snapped in humid breeze, and as they ferried the admiral's body toward Rabaul, the island's jungle faded behind them, still scarred, still smoking, a wound on green canvas left by American arithmetic and a captain's wild plan. At the same hour, deep inside Navy communications at Truk, a telegrapher unaware of the tragedy prepared to transmit routine dispatches. He paused when a single strip of intercepted American traffic landed on his desk. Simple weather chatter from Guadalcanal. Harmless. Yet, as he keyed it through, a shiver ran through him. Something had changed in the air, a sense that a pillar had fallen, though walls had not yet shaken. Japan would not announce the death for weeks. When it did, the nation wept not as subjects of an empire, but as children who had lost the one father who understood the war's true balance. For now, secrecy held, but in quiet mess halls, whispers spread like incense smoke. A great hawk has fallen. The sky itself mourns. Who will lead us now? Across the ocean that same evening, at Henderson Field, there was no triumphal parade. Only a silent dinner tent, tired pilots, and one empty stool for Lieutenant Ray Hine lost over grey water. 2 sides, 1 sky, and far too many ghosts. Henderson Field slept badly that night. Not from fear for once. No Betty bombers came droning over the palms. No Zeros stitched the taxiways with fire, but from a different weight, a silence heavier than battle. The men of the 339th Fighter Squadron sat at mess tables under swaying lanterns, spoons untouched in half-filled tins. They had returned, most of them. Lieutenant Ray Hine had not. One stool remained empty. His flight jacket hung untouched on a nail, goggles still looped over the collar, as though he might step through the canvas flap any moment and make some dry joke about missed chow. No one moved it. In combat squadrons, absence always had a seat. Captain Thomas Lanphier kept his voice low, subdued rather than triumphant. Word spread anyway. Even whispered accomplishments carry weight in desperate theatres. Yamamoto's plane went down. No shouts. No pounding of tables. Just the sound of rain outside the tent, and the slow exhale of men who could not decide whether they had slain a dragon or simply provoked another storm. Major John Mitchell, the quiet architect of the intercept, studied the steam curling from his coffee tin. He spoke so softly that only those nearest heard. Remember, no talking. Not to army brass. Not to Navy liaisons, not to correspondents, not to families. This stays here. Lanphier blinked hard, adrenaline clashing with obedience. He had killed the most famous admiral in the Pacific by rights the world should know. But secrecy orders burned through the chain of command like tracer fire. Washington had already transmitted them, no mention of code sources. Operation classified. In the dim tent, Sergeant Dick Hurd finally muttered the unspoken fear. Jappel hit back hard. Mitchell nodded. Assume they know we know, but the point stands, we must act as though this was luck. Eyes only, tight lips. They all knew why. The Japanese must not suspect that America's cryptanalysts had peeled open JN-25 like a ripe fruit. If Tokyo realized their naval codes were compromised, the advantage would vanish in a flash. So the victory belonged to silence. In Washington, the message hit like lightning. The secure teletype from Admiral William Halsey's staff arrived in the Navy Department with no fanfare, just a courier in rain-slicked trench coat, boots clicking on marble. The line officer on duty read the cable twice, then walked fast to the secure office suite. Inside, Fleet Admiral Ernest King removed his glasses slowly. "So," he murmured, "they did it." Across the river at Army Intelligence, Brigadier General George Marshall received a parallel draft. He spoke one sentence to his aide. "We must not appear pleased. Because how could the United States crow publicly about assassinating the Imperial Navy's commander? To trumpet success would be to confess foreknowledge. Worse, it risked revealing ultra. Marshall dictated instructions. Official posture. Routine patrol engagement. Target of opportunity. Sir," the aide hesitated, "the press will demand details." "The press," Marshall replied, "will receive none." A pause. Papers rustled like distant surf. "And notify the President." At the White House, Franklin Roosevelt read the signal in his wheelchair beside the Oval Office fireplace. For a man who commanded continents, he seldom allowed emotion to crease his public mask. But this night, he closed his eyes briefly, exhaled, and murmured in a tone of weary finality. Yamamoto gambled long ago, at Pearl Harbor. Today, he collected his wager. He placed the paper down gently. History will record nothing of it yet. Back in the Solomons, a Navy public information officer visited Henderson Field 2 days later. He asked polite questions. He pretended curiosity about long-range lightning patrols. Pilots stared at their boots, reciting the approved fiction. Routine sweep, intercepted bogies, lucky timing. The PIO returned to Espiritu Santo with a notebook full of half-truths. By the time it reached press bureaus in Honolulu, the story was already sanded down to anonymity. No mention of codebreakers, no mention of Yamamoto's itinerary, no glory, no roar. Only the enemy's grief would give shape to America's deed. Days later, Tokyo radio announced it. Admiral Yamamoto fell in battle while inspiring forward troops. The Japanese Empire draped itself in mourning silk. Factories paused. School children bowed toward shrines. A broadcast intoned his virtues like a liturgy. Millions believed he had died by accident of fate. Only a few at the top suspected the truth. They too fell silent, not to preserve pride, but to hide fear. For if the Americans could put fighters over island jungle at the exact moment Yamamoto's bomber crossed the sky, what else did they know? Who else could they reach? Back at Henderson, a chaplain folded his hands. He spoke over a small wooden cross hammered beside the runway. Dust swirled in propwash as another lightning lifted skyward. "For Lieutenant Raymond K. Hine," he said, voice steady, "who gave his life so others might return safely." The jungle hummed. Engineers hammered sheet metal. Pilots tugged zippers. No bugler played. The war did not allow long farewells. Lanphier and Barber stood side by side, each quietly nursing his version of the mission, the credit, the memory of tracer arcs and burning aluminum. Fame might yet find them someday, but secrecy had delayed applause, and time would sharpen disputes into rival claims. For now, there was only heat, sweat, and the steady churn of engines preparing to climb again. Above them, clouds drifted white over shattered palm stumps and rust-stained sand. Warships ploughed the slot below, and somewhere high in the blue, where Yamamoto once dreamed of empire's reach, 4 contrails curved west, hunting again, victory unspoken, loss unburied, and the knowledge that one mathematically precise interception had changed the Pacific's heartbeat forever. The war ended not with a trumpet note for the men of the 339th Fighter Squadron, but with paperwork and silence. Victory parades rolled down Broadway and Pennsylvania Avenue. Children waved flags. Factory sirens wailed for peace. But in quiet corners of Oahu, Espiritu Santo, and dusty airfields now overgrown with kunai grass, men from Operation Vengeance simply packed duffels and went home. No medals pinned in public, no grand citations read on courthouse steps, no headlines screaming, "They killed Yamamoto, they changed the war." Instead, they returned to farms, barber shops, aircraft hangars, used car lots. A few stayed in uniform, rising through ranks. Most faded into civilian anonymity, like contrails dissolving in tropical heat. Secrecy had protected Ultra, but secrecy also starved memory. In 1946, a Senate subcommittee quietly reviewed classified Pacific operations. A colonel in a crisp green jacket, voice flat as a ledger line, summarized the mission in a sealed hearing. Joint Navy-Army Air Forces experiment. Objective achieved. Result contributed materially to Pacific victory, a senator asked. "This assassination, does it trouble you?" The colonel paused. "We killed an admiral who planned Pearl Harbor. The men who flew that day saved hundreds of ships and thousands of sailors. The war ended sooner. That is all. No moral debate, no legalistic passing." In that austere room, war remained a ledger, lives saved versus lives taken. Still, the word assassination hung in the air like cordite. It would follow the mission for decades. In Japan, the memory wore different colors. Former naval aviators met in smoky Tokyo cafes in the late 1940s, uniforms replaced by frayed business suits. They spoke of Yamamoto as a fallen patriarch, flawed, brilliant, doomed by his own foresight. One veteran whispered over a chipped teacup, "He warned us. He said we could win for 6 months. After that..." He tapped ash. America fought with factories, not fury. Japanese officers, interrogated in 1945 and 1946, admitted the shock Operation Vengeance inflicted. One diarist confessed, "We realized then everything was known. We thought the gods favored us." But the Americans did not rely on gods. Some blamed fate, others blamed Tokyo arrogance. But deeper than grief lay admiration for precision, audacity, the sheer mathematical nerve of the mission. Yamamoto himself had once studied in America, admired its industrial genius, understood its restlessness. In a way, his death closed the circle of his own prophecy. Yet the pilot's glory languished in bureaucratic shadows until the 1960s, when classified archives began to crack open. A short notice in a defense journal credited the Lightning Squadron with a significant intercept. Then came a series of newspaper features. Lanphier, ever charismatic, granted interviews. Barber disputed claims. Letters flew. Old flight maps re-emerged. Gun camera film was studied like scripture. 2 men, 1 sky, 1 mission, and a debate over who fired the killing burst. Public fascination churned. War correspondents who had never known the full story now wrote it in half-understanding. Some framed the intercept as vengeance, some as assassination, others as bold tactical genius. A television documentary in 1967 interviewed Admiral Halsey. He smiled thinly and said only, "We asked the impossible. The boys delivered it." But even that clip ran only once, drowned by Vietnam broadcasts and moonshot headlines. Operation Vengeance never became a Hollywood blockbuster or a textbook chapter children memorized. It stayed a footnote too precise, too classified, too ethically tangled to parade like Midway or D-Day. Then came the 1985 Pacific Veterans Reunion in Hawaii. Grey hair, wrinkled flight jackets, medals pinned on aged chests that no one had noticed for decades. A Japanese former Zero pilot bowed deeply to an American P-38 man. They stood together, eyes glass bright, not from bitterness but memory. Someone asked a surviving Yamamoto staff officer whether he resented his commander's fate. He answered simply, "A warrior dies in war, but your precision impressed us." Yamamoto would have respected it. In another corner, Colonel Rex Barber spoke softly to a crowd of young air cadets. Behind him, maps of the Solomons fluttered in the trade wind. People ask whether we hunted a man or changed a war. We didn't think about that. We thought about convoys, about ships, about boys in foxholes on islands no one could pronounce. He paused, voice thinning. We proved something. Long-range precision strike, joint command, navigation as a weapon, intelligence married to aviation. That was new. That became the world. His listeners nodded. They flew jets, now silent killers, guided by orbital satellites and radars that could see through storms. But Barber's words drew a straight line from jungle strips to digital skies, from slide rules and dead reckoning to computer-guided missiles. The experiment had become doctrine. Operation Vengeance had become blueprint. The men from Henderson never asked for monuments. They never marched with banners or demanded glory. They had flown a mission that sounded insane, succeeded against arithmetic and jungle and doubt, and then swallowed their triumph because victory demanded silence. History eventually whispered their names, but that was not the point. The point was this. A captain's wild idea shattered a myth that commanders were untouchable. A handful of pilots bent math into a weapon and rewired naval warfare. They proved precision could replace attrition, and hundreds of ships, thousands of sailors, lived because of it. War memorials usually celebrate the seen tanks, beaches, ships aflame. Operation Vengeance was victory in the invisible domain, signals, timing, distance, calculation. It was the first long-range targeted decapitation strike in modern combat. Today, drones fly where P-38 seconds once dared. Satellites do what navigators once scribbled by flashlight. And every military planning room on Earth follows a path first charted over Bougainville's jungle in the silence of April skies. One admiral died. A navy lost its compass. A world learned a new way to wage war. And the men who proved it? They went home quietly and let the future speak for them.